Released in 2011, Intel's Sandy Bridge, basically Core 2000 series of CPUs, were the fastest consumer CPUs around, and by a large margin. AMD's competitor in the form of the FX series was never really amazing, nor were there A-series APUs. Some people even say that Sandy Bridge was the last major improvement from Intel, who never really provided such a huge generational jump in performance ever since. Let's see how one of the most memorable processors from the generation, a Core i5-2500K, holds up today. Without much doubt, the 2500K was a legendary processor. It featured 4 cores and 4 threads clocked at 3.3 GHz, but almost anybody could overclock it to 4.3 GHz or even higher without much effort. Considering that it's an 8-year-old CPU, performance is pretty crazy even in 2019. It's still pretty much on par with the much newer Ryzen 3 2200G, and keep in mind, the Ryzen processor came out 7 years later. For the test today, I'll be using 8GB of single-channel DDR3 1600 RAM on a Gigabyte Z77P D3 motherboard. Intel CPUs seem to not really care about RAM speed so much, and the Gigabyte motherboard is a decent choice for around $70 on AliExpress, but lower-tier motherboards can also overclock the 2500K pretty well. I've overclocked the CPU to 4.1 GHz without issues, and there's room left to spare. The rest of the system consists of an AMD R9 Fury and a 750-watt power supply. Let's get into the benchmarks. I've tested these games in the same fashion as the R9 Fury video, which featured the Ryzen 3 2200G, so we'll be getting almost a direct comparison, although the Ryzen had 16 GB of faster DDR4 RAM to use. Starting off with the easier to run games, BioShock Infinite ran at 72 FPS at the 4K Ultra preset, which is a good result, but it speaks more for the GPU than the CPU. The Ryzen was able to maintain an almost identical 73 FPS in the same test. Dirt 4 ran at 51 FPS average on the 4K Ultra preset with anti-aliasing off using the 2500K, which is significantly higher than the 41 FPS average of the 2200G system. The difference in FPS may also be due to differences between the tracks. As usual, know that the footage you see on screen today is not representative of real-world gameplay. GTA 4 ran at 45 FPS average with very high settings on the Intel processor, while the Ryzen managed slightly less at 41. However, for some reason, the Intel system seems far more stuttery, dropping to 15 or 20 FPS quite a lot. GTA 5 ran at 49 FPS average using the Intel processor at 4K very high settings without anti-aliasing, while the Ryzen system managed 43 average. If the two processors seem closely matched, it's because they really are, although testing games at 4K resolution isn't the best way to differentiate them. The Rise of the Tomb Raider in-game benchmark at the 1080p very high preset ran at an average of 71 FPS, with stutter when changing scenes, while the Ryzen system managed a better 78 average. This game was tested in DirectX 12 mode. Finally, The Witcher 3 ran at 53 FPS average at the highest graphical and processing settings at 1080p on the Intel system, while the AMD ran at 49. Again, very closely matched. While the Ryzen 3 2200G was never the best CPU for gaming, it was always an excellent choice. Well, it was matched and perhaps even beaten by a 7-year-older CPU in most of the games we tested today. The 2500K was not even the flagship at the time, and also while the Ryzen was overclocked to its absolute limit at around 3.8 GHz, the i5 has plenty more to give. The 2500K is also far cheaper used, and it uses cheaper DDR3 RAM, although motherboards are slightly more expensive. Now, it's not crushing the Ryzen in every way. The Ryzen runs cooler, even including its much more powerful onboard GPU, which the 2500K is really lacking in. It's also a low-end consumer chip, while the i5 was more of a high-end choice at its release. The two are just really closely matched in 2019 though. The results today also speak for GPU performance, even though the CPU might not be the bottleneck at all, and the GPU is running at 100% usage, upgrading the CPU may still provide a small increase in FPS. So in 2019, should you pick one of these up? I'd recommend it if you're looking to save as much money as you possibly can, since these can be found for about $30 used. The 1155 socket is not super dead, but there aren't a whole lot of upgrade choices. Also, you'll need an upgraded cooler to extract the most out of the chip, as well as a fairly decent motherboard. All told, the end cost might be about $50 or so cheaper than the Ryzen if you go used. If you have more money to spend though, get the Ryzen. It's far more future-proof, and the socket AM4 is extremely promising. Thanks for watching.